Bible study for everybody met Tuesday night, the 26th of March. And the discussion centered around Mark chapter 8, verses 27 to 38. We had a brief review of some questions that had come up before. One was about when was the Jewish Old Testament, the Tanakh, translated into Greek, and the Old Testament, the Jewish Old Testament, was written down between 1500 and about 400 or 450 BC. It was translated about that time, 400 BC, into Aramaic, which was the common language of the day. And in the time frame between about 250 and 160 BC, the Tanakh was translated into Greek. That was the name for that was the Septuagint, and that was the popular version during Jesus' time. It was the version that Paul quoted out of. So that's how it came to be translated into Greek. Another question that came up was, what was the origin of the word Jew, or the use of the word Jew? Well, the divided kingdom, that kingdom divided into two, the northern and the southern kingdoms, around 900 BC upon the death of Solomon. Around 700 BC, the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom, and that essentially was the end of the northern kingdom. And around 600 BC, the Babylonians conquered the southern kingdom, and that was essentially the end of the southern kingdom. Now, it so happened that in the southern kingdom, the tribe of Judah was the predominant tribe left at the time of the Babylonian conquest. And hence the word Jew, which was kind of a shortening of Judah, became applied from that time on to all Israelites. You know the word. Abram was first called a Hebrew in Genesis 14:13, and so that word was used also. But the word Jew grew out of the predominance of the tribe of Judah in the southern kingdom at the time of the Babylonian conquest. And so that was kind of how those came about. We then had a brief review of what we had talked about the week before, Mark chapter 7, verses 31 to chapter 8, verse 26, when Jesus was in action. They were all over the area here. They traveled from the healing of the Syrophoenician woman up here in the area of Tyre, which is almost off of our map, and then they went to Sidon, and then they went to back down into the Decapolis area here, where there was the healing of a deaf mute and the feeding of the 4,000. Then they crossed over the Sea of Galilee to Dalmanutha and bumped into the Pharisees again. Then they left there and had the discussion about the yeast of the Pharisees, and then they ended up in Bethsaida, where he healed the blind man in 2 phases. Now in 827, we're going to shift gears, and they're on their way up here to the town of Caesarea Philippi, in the Tetrarchy of Philip. Down in this area was the Tetrarchy of Herod, or the governorship of Herod. This is the governorship of Philip up in this area. And Jesus will shift gears. Starting at verse 8:27, it says, "Now Jesus and his disciples went out into the towns of Caesarea Philippi, and on the road he asked his disciples, saying to them, 'Who do men say that I am?' So they answered, 'John the Baptist, but some say Elijah, and others one of the prophets.' And he said to them, 'But who do you say that I am?' Peter answered and said to him, 'You are the Christ.'" Christ was the Greek word for Messiah. Messiah was the Hebrew word, and they both kind of meant the anointed one, or the anointed one of God. And so the question that we wanted to deal with is, who do you say that I am? Well, in the book of Matthew, chapter 16, verse 13 to 17, where we have a parallel of the exact same episode, it says this: Simon Peter answered and said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus answered and said to him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." And so the implication is that revelation needed to come from the Holy Spirit, or God through the Holy Spirit. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 3, we read this. Paul wrote, "I want you to understand that no one speaking by the Spirit of God says Jesus is cursed, and no one can say Jesus is Lord except by the Holy Spirit." So if you say that Jesus is Lord, you are saying that by the Holy Spirit. The second question that we tried to deal with very briefly was, why did Jesus have to die? Why did he have to be killed? Wasn't there some other way that he could have died? Why was there such a violent death? And I tried to make the case for several things. One, there was a legal necessity. When something is wrong, when someone is wronged, when you are wronged, someone has to pay. There is no free ride, as we say. So if I come over to your house and break a lamp, either you pay for it or I pay for it. If you forgive me for breaking it, you've paid for it. If someone insults you, insults your reputation, hurts you personally, does something that destroys an opportunity for you, someone is going to have to pay for that. Either you will forgive it and you will bear the debt, or you will try to get retribution, but someone is going to pay for it. So any kind of a debt that is established or a wrong that is done, someone's going to have to pay for it. It establishes a debt. And true forgiveness always entails suffering. Ironically, of course, if you pay the price of forgiveness, it's only then that there's any chance of righting a wrong or otherwise breaking a cycle of injustice and retaliation. Forgiveness entails some sort of suffering. Righting wrongs comes by paying the cost of suffering, and therefore it should be no surprise to us when God says, the only way I can forgive the sins, the wrongs of the human race is to suffer. Either you will have to pay a penalty for my sin, or I will pay the penalty. And in verse 31, it should not come as any surprise to us when we read, the Son of Man must suffer. Must suffer. When Jesus said the Son of Man must suffer. Now, who would do that? I mean, who would suffer enough to pay the debt of all the wrong that goes on in your life and in my life? Well, it would have to be someone who loved us with no restriction, loved us unconditionally, authentically loved us. That's called agape love in Greek, and it's love with no restrictions. And only God can give that. So, I mean, who can give love without need? If we're really honest with each other, we are not capable of doing that. We're always looking for something in return. Acceptance of ourselves, and the list goes on and on. So then, I mean, it is a good question. Why would God create us and then have all this happen, knowing it was going to happen, and redeem us at such a great cost? Even though he doesn't need us. Of course he doesn't need us. And the answer to that, I believe, is because he loves us. His love is perfect, it's radical, it's vulnerable, it's true love, it's love without any conditions. The next reason I think that Jesus had to die was, and couldn't die a normal death or throw himself off a cliff, but it had to be a violent death. In the book of Hebrews we read, without the shedding of blood there is no remission or forgiveness of sin. And blood is not a magical thing in the Bible. What it means is life given or taken before its natural end. And life given or taken is before its natural end, is the most extreme gift or price that can be paid in this world. Only by giving his life could Jesus, God, have made the greatest possible payment for the debt of sin. And not only was it payment, but it was a demonstration, because the Son of Man was not killed like a criminal. He was executed by the world's envy of jurisprudence, the Jewish Sanhedrin and the Roman legal system. He wasn't lynched by an enraged mob. He was arrested with official warrants. He was tried. He was executed. So in the cross, Christ revealed that the world's systems are corrupt, that they serve power and oppression instead of justice and truth. In condemning Christ, the world condemned itself. So he turned the values of the world on their head. He didn't fight fire with fire. He didn't raise an army to put down the latest corrupt regime. He didn't take power. In fact, he gave up power. And through that, triumphed by exposing the world's misuse and glorification of power. He broke the spell of the world's systems. In the world, the fear of death is probably the greatest threat that we have. And Christ showed us that death could be won, that you could win over death, and that death will actually put you in God's arms and make you all that you hoped it would be. And death, in fact, lost its sting. So Christ was a new kind of king, a new kind of Messiah, unlike any the world had ever imagined, a king who must suffer and die. And that pretty much then concluded let me get through some slides here that I didn't use, concluded our discussion for that night. And next week we're going to cover Mark chapter 9, verses 2 to 13. God bless you.